So if you were trying to help an entrepreneur in a developing country, could you do so with a loan as small as $25? Our next speaker is co-founder of the microfinance website Kiva. Please welcome Jessica Jackley.
Thank you. Good afternoon. I'm high maintenance right now. I have so many things I had to bring out here. And we're ready. Thank you all for having me today and for spending this next 15 minutes or so listening to my story. The stories that we tell each other about ourselves are very important. The stories that we hear and tell one another about other people are very important. And most important, I think, the stories that we write together, our collective story, and the way that we participate in each other's stories. That's what's most important. Today I'm going to start my story. You can start anywhere in a story, but I'm going to start when I was 6 years old, and I'm going to tell you now, don't worry, I'm going to fast forward through this thing. So we will jump over many years. But when I was 6, I was in Sunday school, and I grew up in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and this was the first time that I heard stories about the poor. Now, I remember feeling a lot of things that day, and it is a vivid memory for me because it was high. It had high emotions, right? So I remember learning in general that the poor were people who needed food, clothing, shelter, something that they didn't have, something very important. And I also remember hearing a few snippets of what the Bible said about these poor people out there. The lesson overall gave me this sense that I was on one side and the poor were way out there in the world on some other side. But if and when I would meet them someday or run into them, it was my job, not being poor, apparently, to help. Now, for those of us who grew up in a Christian tradition, I'm going to paraphrase. Forgive me, this is not quoting scripture very accurately, but I do remember generally two concepts that day that I heard. One was the teacher said that the poor would always be with us. And I remember this idea scared me to death because in my 6-year-old mind, I pictured this long line of people that were always going to follow me around. And no matter how much I would share, I have a little brother, so I got the concept of sharing. But no matter how much I would share my stuff with them, and I'm thinking in terms of my favorite toy, half my sandwich at lunch, or whatever. That was my idea of philanthropy at the time. So I thought as much as I would share, they would always be there. They would never go away, and I could never actually really solve the problem. Now, thankfully, I also learned that day that Jesus said, again, paraphrasing, what you do for the least of these, you do for me. And that was very motivating. I thought, wow, well, first of all, I didn't know that God needed any help. I thought if God wants to do something, God does something. But apparently, God needs help. This is cool. Even a 6-year-old kid can be helpful. That's also cool. And it's a very important thing to figure this thing out, this whole serving the poor thing. Now, unfortunately, though, and I think this is typical, but you know your experience better than I do, of course, that idea of the poor always being with us won out a little bit. So those two feelings that I had of feeling excited and motivated, but also a little overwhelmed, or more than a little overwhelmed, this feeling won out a little bit more. And I started for the first time to sort of be afraid of this group of people in the world that were always going to want something from me. Now, fast forward a bit. Growing up, other stories that I heard about the poor were in fact stories focused on negative things, focused on sadness and suffering. I heard stories of people that were all about, sickness and pain and desperation. That's all I heard about the poor. Those were the only kinds of stories I heard about these individuals. Or really, usually it was this group of people. And naturally, I began to not want to hear those stories anymore. I began to tune out. Every time I would sort of see it coming, I might listen, I might pay attention and be polite. I might even read the brochure that would come in the mail or, watch the late night infomercial, whatever. But I wasn't really engaged. I was slowly tuning out. It's a natural human reaction, I think. Something approaches that makes you feel bad about yourself, feeling guilty, maybe even shameful of my own relative middle-class American wealth. And I started to detach. Now, what's interesting is on the outside, things looked pretty normal. I was still giving and volunteering. I did all sorts of service trips and volunteer activities in high school and college and beyond. And I was still engaged. But if I'm really honest with myself, I was giving and acting out of a place that was not the best. It was out of a place of selfishness, a place of wanting to sort of, buy my excuse to go on with my day. So I would give when solutions were on sale, right? Who can argue with the whole for the cost of a cup of coffee, you can save a child's life. I mean, if you don't throw your change in the jar at that point, I mean, who can argue with that, right? I would give when I was cornered or when I was forced, really awkward situations, walking down the street, somebody begging. I would give. I would do things. But, again, I was sort of continually detached and disembodied from this whole group of people out there. And as I said, in fact, it was a transaction. I was buying my right not to hear the sad stories and to go on with my day and get back to my real, regular life, right? Now, a few years ago, I was, so this is not a prescriptive talk. I'm not saying I recommend everyone do this, but I didn't really have a plan after undergrad. I studied philosophy and poetry, and then I moved to California sort of on a whim because I was in love with the boy. My parents were thrilled. So I moved, ended up staying in California. That was a little over 10 years ago. But thankfully, I happened to land in this wonderful first job out of college. Again, it was completely not a strategic plan, but the day 2 that I had landed in California, I walked around Stanford's campus, which happened to be right across the street from where I was living, and I got a job as a temporary administrative assistant for somebody on medical leave in this amazing place called the Center for Social Innovation. Now, I was definitely interested still in nonprofits in the social sector, but I had no focus in terms of a particular area of the world or a method of change. I just wanted to learn. It was a great place to learn. For 3 years, I ended up staying. My job evolved. I planned different events, and basically I had this excuse to be at the Stanford Business School, crash classes, crash lectures, whatever, and hear amazing people with amazing ideas about using business skills and thinking to cause social change. Now, what I didn't reveal is when I studied my philosophy and poetry undergrad, I mean, I was not at all interested in business. In fact, I was sort of negative about it. I thought, why in the world would I study that stuff? That is about making money and being selfish, and it's not about changing the world. Well, little did I know it actually can be kind of useful in doing things and in making things happen. So one day, I hear this guy speak, Dr. Muhammad Yunus. It was the fall of 2003, 3 years before Dr. Yunus would win the Nobel Peace Prize for his work with the Grameen Bank, pioneering modern microfinance. And just actually to define some terms really quickly, in case this is a totally new word to anybody here, think of microfinance as financial services and products for the poor. So imagine all the things that you get at your bank when you go there, savings products, loan products, insurance, whatever, and imagine those tailored to the needs of somebody living on a few dollars a day. That's sort of the general definition of microfinance. Microlending or microcredit is the thing that Kiva focuses on, which I'll tell you about in a minute. And the thing that I heard about from Dr. Yunus that day when I sat in on a lecture that I shouldn't have sat in on in the back on the steps in case I would be asked to leave early. Well, thankfully, I got to sit through the whole thing, and that moment, that evening, changed the trajectory of my life. Not only did I learn about microfinance, which sounded kind of too good to be true, but I also heard for the first time in a very long time, maybe the first time ever, these pure stories of the poor, but that was actually sort of an afterthought, stories of entrepreneurs who happened to not have a lot of resources, stories of entrepreneurs who were getting up every day all over the world. His entrepreneurs that he had worked with were in Bangladesh. He talked about basket weavers and farmers, people who were waking up, working hard every day, doing everything right to change their own lives and improve the standard of living for themselves and their families, but they simply didn't have access to this resource, a little bit of financial capital, even $5, $10, $20 sometimes, to make their businesses grow a little more quickly and actually get ahead of things and improve their profitability and actually have a little extra money to change things for the better in their lives. So this seemed magical to me. Not only that microfinance was out there and seemed to work, but way more importantly, to hear a story about somebody who was poor and not feel awful and not want to run the other way or just want to donate and then get on with things. I was fascinated. And I wanted to meet these entrepreneurs. So very naively, again, not a prescriptive talk, although if you do this, let me know how it goes. I support you. So I quit my job, and I moved to East Africa, and I thought, I want to learn about this myself. I interviewed 150 entrepreneurs. I worked with a nonprofit there throughout Kenya and Uganda and Tanzania, a different village every other day. And I asked them to tell me their stories. I asked them to tell me how their lives had changed, if they had, after they had received this $100 grant, actually. It wasn't even a loan, but I thought, close enough, I want to get out there and learn. But it was a $100 grant from a wonderful nonprofit called Village Enterprise Fund in the Bay Area in California. I asked, did you get the money? How did it go? What do you do for your business? What is your life like? What do you find valuable about this whole experience? And I heard over and over again, in fact, stories of amazing hope and life change and empowerment. I heard stories that weren't all perfect business successes, but a shocking number of them were. Even if it was, I used to have 10 goats and now I have 50. things had changed in a pretty substantial way for these families. This gentleman, in fact, was a fisherman in the lake back in the top left corner of the picture, if you can see there. He supported 33 people. He had a second-grade education, and he had basically, with his $100 grant, purchased new fishing nets and repaired a hole in the boat that he had made himself. And with that, things had changed drastically. Many of his children had started to go to school who had never gone before. He was able to have better nutrition for his family. Many people that I spoke with had countless other somewhat predictable changes in the standard of living. But what I loved the most were the things that I learned that were not expected and were unpredictable, because it was a very humbling experience. Had I been given a magic wand at that point in my life, I mean, I thought I knew what to do. I thought I could have fixed everything had I been given that power. And as I interviewed entrepreneur after entrepreneur, one of many things that I learned was that I would have gotten a lot wrong. I would have not thought to afford to buy sugar to put in tea, not necessarily for the family, but for guests, so that that family could feel proud. And this was something I heard over and over again. I would have not thought when I was visiting a family in a slum, actually the biggest slum not only in Nairobi, not only in Kenya, but on the whole African continent, Kibera. When I would visit families there, one of them told me that they had saved up for months to buy a lock for the door. Now, I'm a small person. I could have pushed their whole home over with one arm. It was a very flimsily constructed home, but they felt safe and secure because of this lock. So the details of change were beautiful. And even if I would interview 20 goat herders in a row, and this happened sometimes, every story was different. And I felt so excited, yes, about microfinance, but mostly about these new stories of the poor that were so exciting and made me have a different story myself, allowed me to interact with them in a different way. So I never heard anybody ask me for a donation while I was there. What they did say was, look, I'm doing this small business. And again, really small businesses, subsistence farmers, seamstresses, goat herders, people who owned a few chickens, people who would buy and sell vegetables in one market and another, very small things. But they would ask me to help them do more of what they were already doing. Often this meant a loan. So very naively, this is a theme for my story, I didn't realize how many amazing microfinance institutions, these banks for the poor, like Dr. Eunice's Grameen Bank, I didn't realize how many already existed. So what I thought was, well, I have some friends, they're not rich, but maybe if we all pool our money together, we can afford your $300 loan and your $500 loan, and hey, wouldn't that be fun? And more importantly, then I have an excuse to tell them these stories, and maybe the world will start to change if we think differently about each other and think about the poor as strong, smart, hard-working people, not just people that make us feel bad about ourselves. So fast forward quite a bit. That picture was taken in the spring of '04. By the spring of '05, I had returned back to Uganda after many months of research and talking to anybody that would give me the time of day. I brought my camera, and I asked people, I took 7 pictures of 7 entrepreneurs, wrote their stories, put it on a really basic website, here's one of them, and spammed my friends and family. I did this with my co-founder, Matthew. My dad is actually up there in the first picture on the left. He was one of our first lenders. And basically said, hey guys, not sure if this is legal yet. The SEC hasn't exactly called me back, but like we think... Yeah, but wouldn't it be so fun, this was my official business pitch, wouldn't it be fun to lend money to my new friends in Uganda? I think they'll pay us back, and we'll get to learn about their lives, and won't this be great? Overnight, the money came in. It actually worked. And to just give you an idea of the growth that Kiva's gone through, that was the beginning. That was just a little, 5 years and a week or so ago. 7 entrepreneurs, $3,000. After that, we sort of said, okay, they were paid, right? And we took the word beta off of the site, and our official launch was October of '05. That first year, October '05 to '06, Kiva did $500,000 in loans. The second year, the total was $15 million. Third year, it was 40. Fourth year, it was 100. Fifth year, today, we celebrated our 5-year anniversary sort of last week. It was fun. We hit $170 million, and today Kiva does between $1 and $2 million a week. And these little $25 bits from friends and family and their friends and family and on, all over the world across 206 countries. So it's spread, it's grown, and it's yay for lenders. Thank you, and that is applause for, that is not my money, that is lenders' money, and entrepreneurs' money, back and forth. But thank you for that. So as I look at this, I mean, one of the weird things about telling your own story is you often need perspective to tell it correctly and accurately. it's hard to always know what's worked and what hasn't in your own life. So as with Kiva, I've gotten a little bit of distance lately. I've tried to think very carefully about what's worked, and I think one of the most powerful things still to this day, I mean, I can talk about all sorts of business principles and stuff. I went back, I figured I should go back and learn what all the fuss was about. So I did get my MBA at Stanford during the first 2 years of Kiva, somewhat reluctantly, but it was a great experience, and I'm definitely a fan. So the business stuff, I can talk about that. But what I feel like what I want to bring today, what I feel like is much more important to talk about, is this idea of telling a new story of the poor. So think of how you feel when you approach someone who is begging and sad, or when you do read these, pull at your heartstrings sort of stories with factual information even, but it's a one-sided story of sadness and suffering in a nonprofit brochure or something like that. And think of how you feel when you see somebody who's smiling and is excited to talk to you about their work, maybe standing in front of a field that they have farmed themselves, and they're about to harvest this rich harvest of wonderful things that will feed themselves, their families, their communities. Think about how you feel when you're talking to somebody who actually enjoys what they're doing every day, has built something from scratch, who's using their skills, using the gifts that they've been given to do something really productive and creative. Somebody who's just, even if you just saw the picture and heard nothing about the story, this is a woman who happens to be poor, but she is surrounded by abundance, not scarcity. This is a woman with full hands. It's a simple thing, but full hands with something to offer, something she's proud of, not an open hand asking for you to swoop in and save her and give her a handout. So what if these stories, you take the picture, you learn the specifics, and then, as we do with Kiva, you have a very specific way to interact that actually reflects what you've just heard. So if you hear a story of sadness, you probably want to give, and you feel so bad, and you think it's hopeless. If you hear a story of a great entrepreneur, I would hope that you think in terms of a partnership, equality, dignity, empowerment, and you can respond that way with a loan. The loan is a very interesting tool, and I want to say more about that in a minute, but that's what Kiva allows people to do today. You lend your $25, and it is a loan, not a donation, not an investment. You lend it, you get it back over time, and you learn about this story as it unfolds right before your eyes. So 3 quick things that I think this experience has taught me that have led to what I'm working on today. So number 1, entrepreneurship at its core. I have a lot of businessy school terms to talk about, but for me, it's basically about making tomorrow better than today in whatever way an entrepreneur sees is possible to make that happen. It can be a small thing, making a new product, improvement, doing a whole big new organization. Whatever it is, it's making something change in a positive way. Another thing that I've learned is a loan is a very sticky tool for attention. If I give you something, or even if I have a purchase or something with you, that's usually kind of the end of the transaction. With a loan, there's an excuse to have an ongoing dialogue. That's proved to be very valuable for what Kiva's done. And then third, if all else is equal, from the entrepreneurs that I've spoken with, given the choice between just money, just a loan, or the same money, but with a supportive community around that, people all over the world who know their story, believe in them, are thinking about them, are watching them and cheering them on, and that they're accountable to, everybody that I've ever spoken with chooses that instead. Everybody chooses the community or the love and the money, not just the money. That has informed my next project, which actually I've been working on for the last year and I launch next month, called ProFounder. It's basically an investment platform for small businesses and startups in the US to raise up to $1 million in actual investments from their friends and family, meaning, heaven forbid, everyday people, unaccredited, unsophisticated investors, to go legal on you, who can contribute whatever they'd like, whatever a minimum investment the entrepreneur sets, based on terms the entrepreneur sets as well. They're structured right now around a revenue share agreement. We found that that's the right fit. I'm happy to talk about this during Q&A later in the day. But basically, what it allows is yet a closer mapping of participating in someone else's story. So what entrepreneurs do, they come to the site, they say, here's me, here's my business, here's what I want to do next with it. They tell their story. This is a theme. And they set terms that make sense to them, basically saying, look, I want to share, for example, 2% of my revenues with all my investors over the next 5 years. And with that, basically, the story unfolds, people get to participate in the journey together, and investors actually have the option of taking their returns in cash or deciding in advance to give whatever returns may come their way, even if it'd be quite a lot of money. They can redirect to a nonprofit. So there's a way to sort of have this full circle loop where a community, a supportive community, comes around an entrepreneur. As the entrepreneur does well, they can feed back to the community what they have reaped. So I'm excited for that. Look out for that next month. And that, for me, is really building on this core lesson of supportive communities coming around an entrepreneur. If you have that, a lot of really amazing things can happen. So to wrap this up, so what's the point? Well, these are just tools. They exist out there, and truthfully, I think we all know there are a lot of tools out there. There are a lot of things, a lot of problems in the world that actually we know how to solve, but we just haven't gotten around to it yet. So not to be a downer here, but I mean, think of a social problem that's important to you. I'm not evangelizing about microcredit per se. It's one thing that I love and I find very effective, but maybe you care about public health, maybe education, maybe something else. Think about the biggest problem in that area. Get it in your head right now. And I want you to ask yourself if we really don't know how to alleviate that problem. Maybe not solve it completely, but at least alleviate it. So I think we all know that tens of thousands of people die every day from preventable diseases. I think we all know there are some really amazing things that are, we know how to solve a lot of problems in education. We know that there's enough food in the world to go around, and yet people starve every day. Like, what the hell's going on? I would like to know. My theory is that somewhere along the way, we have heard the wrong story, and we've believed the wrong story, and we've somehow forgotten that real change is possible. We've been told that these problems just aren't going away. We've been told that we actually can't do something meaningful, that all that's really needed of us is this change in the jar and then walk away. I think what we actually need is to be fully engaged, fully connected, and to remember that change is possible. So these are tools. What matters is how we use them and if we use them at all. And I think we won't, as long as we keep forgetting the real story and as long as we listen to the wrong stories. But if we can remember a few things, number one, that I think entrepreneurship at its core is about hope. It's about seeing that change is possible in the world, and it's about being committed to taking steps to actually make that change happen, making tomorrow better than today. If we can remember that, if we can remember that what we believe actually defines what's possible in the world, and that's where it all starts, then I think the challenge is just reminding ourselves that so much is possible. And for me, the way that I remind myself of this is by stopping and listening to someone else's story. Every single time I do this, and I'm genuinely open to learning about that other human being, I am amazed and I am inspired. And I don't have any doubt that it's possible to do great things. Not only is it possible for me, but it's possible for them too. I have one thing that I need to mention. Yesterday, I arrived, I flew in from LA, I got to the airport, and my driver was standing holding a sign. I go and I say hello to him, and his accent was too familiar not to ask, so I inquired in Swahili where he was from, kind of going out on a limb. He was from a small village on the border of Kenya and Uganda, where the first 7, it's a village, it's tiny, the first 7 Kiva entrepreneurs were from. We had an amazing conversation. I heard his story. It was tearful, it was amazing, it was incredible. And as we were driving to the hotel last night, I asked him if he got to stand up here, what he would say. I think it's only fair. And because he said, please tell those people not to forget about us. And I thought that that was really the most important thing that I could deliver, whether it was for him or for me. I wish I would have thought of it too. But I want to urge us all not to forget, not just about Chirora, Uganda, and Francis, my new friend, but to not forget about the potential that we all have, because regardless of, forget moving resources around, forget the logistics of that and the tools that exist and innovation, all that stuff will happen. That's the easy part. What I urge us today is to remind ourselves to stop and listen to each other's stories, because once we are utterly convinced, if we remind ourselves to be convinced in each other's potential and that change is really possible, that's, in the end, I think the real place of, the real origin for making tomorrow better than today, and that's really what changes the world. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Jessica?
Thank you.
Jessica?
Thank you. Oh, okay. Thank you.
Don't leave yet.
Thank you.
We only have a minute for a short question, but I wanted to ask
you.
you...
Have questions? Oh, great.
A very short question, like a one-sentence answer. But so Kiva's now channeling between 1 to 2 million a week, 600,000 lenders. Do you have any lessons about having such a rapid scaling into a global company and staying true to your core values?
I do. I'm glad you asked. This was not planned. How much time do I have for an answer? I'll give myself a boundary.
30 seconds.
Okay, ready? Here we go. So Kiva's mission is to connect people through lending for poverty alleviation. Okay, that's the mission. It's not, oh, let's just get a lot of money and dump it into microfinance. It's not, let's build a big, powerful network of microfinance institutions. Those are fine things to do. It is about connecting people, right? It's about telling these new stories and having that change happen from the inside out. I have literally turned down one time I turned down $10 million in a 5-minute conversation because somebody called and said, hey, we have this new CSR thing, that's corporate social responsibility. And I was like, I know. And we have $10 million in our budget, and we'd love to put it into Kiva. What do you say? And I said, that is awesome. Thank you so much for thinking of us. But do you mean you want to divide that up into little bits, give it to your employees, and have these human beings come to the website, read stories, choose a person that speaks to them, go through the experience, get updates about Joe the goat herder and his new goat and a picture, or do you have this idea that you want to dump it in the system, get it back, and then check off your CSR box and feel good? That's fine. I can tell you dozens of other institutions that will allow you to do that. But at the time, in our development, we did not have the capacity to do anything but our core thing. We couldn't even do matching or anything else because we were so hanging on for dear life. And basically, this gentleman said, no, I just kind of wanted to dump it in the system. I don't want to bother with dividing it up and handing it out to people. And I said, well, that is totally okay, and I wish you the best, and here are some other organizations you might want to go look at, because that's not what we do. Had we accepted that money at the time, it would have taken away, in $25 and $50 and $100 bits, $10 million worth of opportunity for people to get involved and to have this experience. So I think there so much is possible. There are opportunities every day for all of us. This is not just about business, but about our own selves and our identity. I think becoming equally comfortable saying yes or no to an opportunity allows you to continue to be who you're supposed to be in the world and have a strong identity and have a strong mission and not drift. As a nonprofit, to turn away money is sort of unheard of, but it was the right thing for us to do, and I would do it again.
Thank you, Jessica.
Thanks. Thank you.